that that's considered a war crime?
It's a light felony.
I'm so uncomfortable using the word Palestinian because I don't think that it exists.
They don't see us as equal human beings who deserve the same rights they do.
Do you view Palestinians and Jews as equal?
No.
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 But to think about other people, other children, not at all, that seems sociopathic.
On the 27th of April this year, Louis Theroux released a documentary on the BBC called The Settlers. The film is a follow-up to his 2011 documentary, Louis and the Ultra Zionists. In both, Theroux goes to the West Bank and shines a light on the Israeli settlers who wear their bigotry like a badge of honor. Both follow Theroux's signature style, where the presenter gives space for others to speak, or in this case, self-incriminate. He's interviewed a lot of extremists in his career, from the Westboro Baptist Church to Boer nationalists in South Africa. But given the recent escalation of Israel's attack on Palestine, I think we can learn a lot from these two documentaries. It's easy to get lost in the sea of headlines, articles, and infographics documenting what's going on, but I think documentaries like Louis Theroux's are really helpful for us to connect the information with the real life situation. So in the spirit of this channel, we're gonna break down each documentary, talking about Theroux's style, and we'll discuss what we can learn about the Zionist assault on Palestine, and more importantly, how we can help. I understand the feeling of powerlessness as we watch this genocide unfold, and you may feel like you can't make a difference in any way, but you can, even if it's just helping one family. And I want to bring your attention to two families that are in desperate need of donations. This video is a fundraiser, and it's for my friend Ahmed. Like me, Ahmed is 27, but while, like the majority of us, I've been witnessing the atrocities unfold through a screen, Ahmed has been stuck right in the middle of the worst conflict of the 21st century in Gaza. And he sent me a message that he'd like me to share with all of you. My name is Ahmed Matar. I'm 27 years old. I lost my father when I was 6 years old. He was killed by the occupation forces during their attack on Gaza in 2003. Before the war, I finished my studies in media. I was passionate about photography and art. I dreamed of building a career, but the war destroyed those dreams. Now, all that matters to me is keeping my family safe. In the first days of this war, I lost 21 relatives, and my family has been displaced 6 times. Our situation is very hard. Food is rare, and the little we find is expensive and low quality. We are forced to survive on whatever we can find. Diseases are spreading fast because we don't have clean water or hygiene supplies, and we are always at risk of getting sick. We are trying to raise awareness about the extreme hardships we face in Gaza: lack of food, the spread of disease, and fear. Here in northern Gaza, violence is getting worse. Bombings and killings happen all around us. The army is giving evacuation orders in nearby areas, and we fear that we will be forced to leave again, even though there is no safe place left. In the end, we kindly ask you to please consider helping our family by donating. May God reward you. Ahmed also asked me to share the fundraiser of another family who are in desperate need of help, a Palestinian mother named Islam and her 4 kids. Her youngest, Tigreed, was born during the war, and she said, "She has never known a single day of peace. Her life began under bombs, and her tiny heart only knows fear and hardship. We live every day without enough food, without clean water, without safety. The children cannot sleep peacefully, cannot go to school, and cannot dream like other children do." Both fundraisers will be linked in the description. Big or small, donations are vital, and if you're not in a position to donate, you can still help. I'll be donating the AdSense from this video to both fundraisers, so if you could turn off ad block, if you could watch this video all the way through, if you could share it, share the fundraisers, comment, like, all that kind of stuff. It sounds really trivial, but it does actually help. Like, you can literally comment how your day is going, a film that you watched recently, a book that you like, a recipe that you made, like all of those things really do help. I want to get this video to as many people as possible, so that's why I'm doing a media analysis. It's like a little fundraiser honeypot. So whether you're a subscriber, a Louis Theroux fan, or you're just passing by, thank you for being here. I'm also hoping that a media analysis is more likely to stay monetized, because last year I made a video on the Met Gala and the Eurovision and Israel and Palestine, and that got demonetized. So I'm really hoping that this can stay monetized. And I'll keep you all updated on Instagram or on my community post as to how all the donations are going. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll know that I'm always saying how important it is to critically analyze the media we consume, whether it is a teen TV show or a BBC article. Louis' documentaries were released on the BBC, which is the British public broadcaster. And in terms of its coverage of Israel and Palestine, the BBC, like so many other media outlets, often align with Israeli talking points, and they use language to soften Israeli actions. We've seen a lot of headlines and reporting saying stuff like Palestinian people were killed rather than Israel killed Palestinian people. The amount of coverage given to Israel and Hamas also skewed the perceived impact of each. On the New York Times website, it's called the Israel-Hamas War, and the coverage of Gaza destruction, Hamas hostages, and the October 7th attacks are given equal sections as if their actions are comparable. And like sly tactics like this, using the passive instead of the active voice, or refusing to call the conflict a genocide, soften the worldview towards Israel. Just this week, the Center for Media Monitoring released a study that found the BBC gives Israeli deaths 33 times more coverage than Palestinians. Palestinians were more often described as having died or been killed in airstrikes, with no mention of who launched them. Israeli victims, by contrast, were described using more emotive language, such as slaughtered, massacred, and butchered. As well as that, we've seen people who are vocally pro-Palestine punished for speaking out. Makara of Kneecap was charged with a terrorism offence in the UK shortly after they performed at Coachella and displayed pro-Palestine messages on stage. Gary Lineker is a sports broadcaster who had to step down from the BBC because he criticised Zionists on social media. And Israel's control over the media narrative is not new. Palestinian people haven't had a fraction of the attention or agency as Israel over the past 100 years to talk about what's happening or to give their point of view. And with huge world powers, especially colonial powers, backing Israel, like the UK, the US, France, and Germany, Israel occupies the center of the world stage, while Palestine isn't even allowed into the theater. Thankfully, this has changed over the past year and a half. The dominant Israeli narrative is finally challenged, and that's largely because of our online access to first-hand footage and information from Palestinians. And while Louis Theroux's documentaries mainly focus on Israeli settlers, the film challenges Israel's narrative and beliefs, and the films, in my opinion, have very strong pro-Palestine sentiments.
They're really suffering, and there's been settlers rampaging through the area of the West Bank. So there's all this
Agitation.
death, tragedy.
Theroux isn't telling us anything that we don't already know, but because of his celebrity and clout, he is in a position to bring more attention to the situation. And I don't know of many other journalists that would be able to make a documentary for the BBC on the West Bank in 2025. Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone was a documentary commissioned by the BBC and released in February of this year, but it was pulled from iPlayer when it emerged that the 13-year-old narrator is the son of a member of the Hamas-run government. They also recently shelved a documentary on Gaza doctors because of worries about impartiality. While Theroux's documentaries may not be groundbreaking, which is something he's admitted himself, they're still valuable because of their reach, and I think they're worth analysing. And like we saw earlier, with so many people being punished for speaking out, it's rare that people get to speak frankly in mainstream media. Louis Theroux is an English BAFTA-winning documentarian who's made over 70 documentaries on a huge range of topics. Wrestling, polyamory, addiction, law enforcement, demolition derbies. And if you're not familiar with his journalism, you may be familiar with his music.
Money doesn't jiggle jiggle, it folds. I wanna see you wiggle wiggle, for sure.
I've watched a lot of Louis Theroux documentaries in my life, and I've been a Louis fan since I was a teenager. But needless to say, I'm quite familiar with his oeuvre, and when his newest documentary, The Settlers, came out, I noticed that it felt different. It's still stamped with his signature Theroux style, but it takes some distinct turns away from how Louis has interrogated religious extremists in the past. But in order to fully explore that aspect, we have to first set up Louis and his style. An adjective you'll often hear attributed to Louis' on-screen persona is faux naive. He's an awkward, nerdy Englishman, and he often contrasts his subjects who tend to be loud personalities, fiercely passionate about their cause. He asks innocent-seeming questions to challenge people, and he adopts an aloof mask that very rarely breaks.
I've wondered sometimes whether I could be a rapper. It's not one of the 10 Commandments, is it?
Yes.
Which one?
Thou shalt not commit adultery.
That's not being gay. It's cheating on someone. I'm thinking very, very hard of a laser beam just sort of blowing up Liz's head. Is that right?
That's about it.
Doesn't make me happy to think of you burning in hell.
Okay.
Does that make me a better person than you?
No?
He really reminds me of a more serious Nathan Fielder. Louis immerses himself in the world of the documentary, forging relationships with the subjects, traveling to different locations and engaging in their passions. He acts as both a stand-in and a guide for the viewer, and because of this personal, subjective approach, it feels like we're discovering information along with him. Most of the time when he meets people for the first time, it's captured on camera. So it feels like we're on a level playing field, like we are getting to know the subject with Louis. This is an illusion, of course. Louis, the directors, the producers, the crew, all do immense prep and research, but the faux naive persona sets the subjects at ease. And Theroux weaponizes curiosity, appearing as a naive, passive observer, but he's actually extremely strategic in his questions, and he often meets their answers with a long silence.
That's a gambler's problem, when to quit.
The film's editing adds to the questioning nature, where long pauses are left in to really let the words sink in. And the editing may also highlight contradictions between what the interviewees say with strategic cuts and B-roll. The films use voiceover to show Louis' own emotions and opinions, or maybe contrast what the subject is saying with facts.
I'd found Tom's attitudes exhausting, and I was still more confused when the karaoke bar he took me to turned out to be largely non-white.
Louis' documentaries may be educational, but they're not didactic. They're not straight informational. And with all the elements of long pauses, editing, voiceover, there's a sense that Louis is kind of just giving the audience the information and letting you draw your own conclusions. Sometimes the subjects are wacky fringe groups or eccentric personalities, taking to the hills of Idaho to doomsday prep or hunting aliens in Area 51, but some of the extreme beliefs have much graver implications, like the Westboro Baptist Church or white nationalists. Much has been made of Louis' choice of subjects, with some criticizing him for platforming fringe or harmful views. And he's spoken about this himself. Theroux addressed the concerns in a column for Deadline. Making a documentary isn't just a matter of handing someone a megaphone and saying, have at it. It's a process of asking the right questions, challenging, contextualizing, doing journalism. In my opinion, his documentaries don't just uncritically platform divisive or controversial figures. I think his critical lens is pretty obvious, and I don't think his journalism equates to platforming. But he also critiques people's views without reducing them to this kind of 2D stereotype. Even while he's examining highly controversial figures, he looks for their humanity and tries to connect with them. He doesn't go into films with the aim of mocking or exposing people, and it's clear that he comes from this place of genuine exploration and curiosity. Theroux wrote in his autobiography,
"The mix of characters we find are bigot with a heart of gold. I just knew we needed to challenge viewers' prejudices, and that a moment in which an interviewee went from being cartoon-like to something more rounded and eliciting compassion would create an interesting emotional tension."
I'm focusing so much on this philosophy of drawing complete portraits of bigots because it highlights how Louis does his best to cultivate nuance and understanding for all of his subjects. But despite his goal, most of the time the bigots don't have a heart of gold. I first watched this documentary about a month ago. I wanted to watch it before I watched The Settlers, and I think I initially bristled because the focus, like the title suggests, is on the Israeli Zionists in the West Bank. And though it features some conversations with Palestinians, my gut reaction was that there should have been more Palestinians featured. But then when I was going back on Louis' older films, I realized that his approach is actually just completely in line with his general style. He focuses on the bigots and lets them self-incriminate. In the Westboro Baptist Church documentary, he's not interviewing gay people. In the neo-Nazi one, he's not interviewing Jewish people. When it comes to Israel and Palestine, the Israeli bigots aren't these fringe group. They're in the millions and they are in power. The documentaries highlight the core lines of Zionist thinking that have been present since its inception. Zionists have historically denied the existence of Palestinians as justification for claiming Palestinian land as their own. The denial has manifested in state legislation going all the way back to the British occupation of Palestine in the early 20th century, and it continues with Zionists refusing to acknowledge Palestinian as a legitimate identity. Zionists believe that they're not taking the land, they're taking it back. They completely ignore and dismiss the Palestinian people's connection to the land.
Talk as though this land, this area means nothing to the Arab people.
Well, it doesn't.
It clearly does.
No. This is the Jewish homeland, and there's never been a Palestinian people. My roots are here, not theirs.
Rashid Khalidi talks about this in his book, The 100 Years' War in Palestine. The Jewish people, and only the Jewish people, are described as having a historic connection to Palestine. There were people there, certainly, but they had no history or collective existence, and therefore could be ignored. The surest way to eradicate a people's right to their land is to deny their historical connection to it. Zionists are careful to only use the labels Arab or non-Jew when describing Palestinian people because calling them Palestinians would give them legitimacy. It would recognize that Palestine is a country, which they don't recognize. Israel's seizure of Palestinian land has been happening for over a century. In the 20th century, the Nakba is the most extreme example of this, and even the people who stayed, the dispossessed Arab owners, couldn't buy back or lease what had once been their property. The land could only be owned or leased by Jewish people. Theroux's documentaries follow this legacy of settlement, and it focuses on the Israeli settlers, the people who decide that it is their God-given right to live in Palestine and take up residence there, forcing out Palestinian people in the process. One of the subjects is an Australian man named Daniel Loria, who works for an organization trying to achieve a Jewish majority in Jerusalem.
Israel's control of East Jerusalem is considered illegal under international law, and yet Daniel's mission is to help Jewish donors buy up more Palestinian properties and find Jewish families to live in them.
Loria helps facilitate the acquisition of homes for Jewish people, and from the few Palestinian voices we hear, it seems that at least some of the homes are seized illegally. Daniel Loria, like so many Zionists, believes that anyone against Israel or Zionism is anti-Semitic.
He doesn't accept that the Jews have returned home. He doesn't like the fact that the Jews here, full stop. That's his problem.
We often see that false equation. It is not the case, but Zionists tend to dismiss any Palestinian anger as purely anti-Semitism when it is actually against the theft of land and the subjugation of Palestinian people. In the documentary, we see Palestinians protesting against the Israeli occupation with an organized march to the military border, and the image of Palestinian children throwing stones who are then met with Israeli soldiers shooting off tear gas and carrying huge assault rifles, I think really sums up the conflict and the imbalance between the Palestinian resistance and the Israeli reaction. We see a Palestinian teenager getting arrested with excessive force, and there's one moment where a Palestinian teenager throws a stone at Louis and his crew because they thought he was Israeli.
They think you're Israeli.
Oh, that's all right.
You know, we're sorry.
Don't worry.
And the contrast between them and the Israelis, the soldiers who evade questioning, who harass the crew, is insane to witness. We see like a micro example of the Israeli rationale for their violent response to Palestinians in the documentary, where Luria tries to garner sympathy for a Jewish person who's just moved in and whose door is pelted with stones and Molotov cocktails. Luria is trying to encourage us to sympathize with him and his plight, as if that will justify the systemic violence perpetuated by Israel. This was filmed in 2011, but I think it holds even more weight today with how Israel used the October 7th attacks to justify launching a full genocide. In the Ultra Zionists documentary, Louis asks the Palestinian teenagers about Hamas, but there's no mention of them in The Settlers.
And blow up buses and things like this.
Hamas, okay, in bus, but what's happened in Gaza? Israeli destroy Gaza, kill our children.
I thought this was really interesting because Hamas is often brought up as a scapegoat or as a way to equate Palestinian violence with Israeli violence when they are opposite ends of the scale. And to this day, people critiquing Israel's actions in news interviews are often asked to condemn Hamas as a way to kind of rationalize or equate Israel's actions.
First and foremost, do you condemn what Hamas did?
Do you support what Hamas launched?
Of course not.
So do you condemn that?
You just condemned Israel for killing civilians, and you won't condemn Hamas for killing civilians?
Part of what I found so affecting in this documentary and in the next was how it conveyed the everyday life of Palestinians and how they've become accustomed to life in this open-air prison. A Palestinian activist is able to identify bullets by the sound of them.
Because the soldiers use M16, and it's not M16, it's normal.
And the idea that you're so used to hearing violence, to hearing bullets throughout your life, that you're able to tell them apart by sound is unfathomable to me. And we see this carry over in the next documentary as well. 14 years after his first film, Theroux returns to the West Bank. The impulse to return was the escalation of Israeli occupation over the past year and a half, and the film is more overt in its support of Palestine than the first film, with Theroux narrating statistics and explaining the history of the occupation in a voiceover.
The violence committed by some settlers is often justified by them as a response to violence they experience from Palestinians, which is much less frequent.
The editing also implicitly critiques Israel. Watching the film makes for a really chilling experience, knowing what Israel is doing to Palestine in real time, razing entire cities to the ground and killing tens of thousands. It's disgusting to see the Israelis celebrating their settlement and their victories, partying, dancing, eating cotton candy, all while having guns strapped to their back. In one shot, a dad and daughter gaze into the distance and smoke from Israeli bombs lingers in the sky. In another, a group of rabbis discuss their plans for Gaza with the backdrop of the smoke-clouded city in the distance. The film dissects Israeli psychology and their plan of action. It highlights how people establish settlements that are illegal under both international and Israeli law, but Israeli law enforcement takes no action against the settlers. And in fact, the settlements end up legitimized by the Israeli state, and they even install army posts to protect them. Like I was talking about earlier, the settlers don't acknowledge the existence of Palestinians. They don't care about laws.
Would that be considered legal under Israeli law?
I don't know.
You don't really care.
I don't care at all. There's some things that transcend the whims of legislation.
And even when they do break the law, they're rarely punished. Theroux tells the story of one settler who shot a Palestinian man, and he had his gun license revoked but was never arrested. So Israeli law enforcement just completely facilitates violence against Palestinian people by not enforcing the laws at all. The Israeli law enforcement do not protect Palestinian people. They only subjugate them further with intimidation, military checkpoints, and arbitrary rules.
40% of all Palestinian men have been arrested.
Can we call the police?
Which police?
The focus of the new documentary is still on the settlers, but there's a greater Palestinian perspective than the first film. Issa Amro is a Palestinian activist who features in the documentary. He lives in Hebron.
Biblical city, home to some 200,000 Palestinians. 1968, the year after it was occupied by Israel, a community of Jewish settlers moved in illegally. They now number around 700.
The Israelis are protected by a heavy IDF presence. Because of his participation in the documentary, Issa Amro's home was raided by the military. He tweeted, "The soldiers raided my house today. They wanted revenge from me for participating in the BBC documentary, The Settlers. After the army left, the settlers raided my house, they injured one activist and cut the tree. They stole tools and the garbage containers." Throughout the film, Issa Amro is subject to discrimination from Israeli soldiers who also harass and intimidate Louis and his crew. They take away his passport for checks, they push him, they train lasers from guns on him. Louis meets with Daniela Weiss, who is described as the godmother of the settler movement. When Louis brings up how Israeli settlements are illegal under international law, Weiss shrugs it off.
Under the Geneva Convention, transferring a civilian population into a conquered terrain, that's considered a war crime.
It's a light felony.
Weiss's extremism is terrifying in and of itself, but it's made even more harrowing and threatening because of her political power and access.
We do for governments what they cannot do for themselves. Even if you take Netanyahu now, he's very happy about what we do here and also about our plans.
I think this is where there's some key differences between Louis' other documentaries on religious extremists or racists and this one, because Theroux responded to criticism that the documentary is focused on a few bad apples, the fringe groups or the very extreme Zionists. In his other films that investigated Boer nationalists, neo-Nazis, the Westboro Baptist Church, they were fringe groups who aren't in power. They're not controlling the decisions of the country, allegedly. But that's not the case with Israeli settlers. Weiss has huge political clout, and her views are an insight into those of the Israeli government as a whole. Her final interview climaxes in her pushing Louis and encouraging him to push her back, attempting to use it as an analogy for Israel's actions in which they are only defending themselves, which we all know is not the truth. And she's also not the only main political figure that we see.
Among the attendees were many senior political figures, including Israel's Minister of National Security. In his youth, Itamar Ben-Gvir had been convicted of incitement of racism. He is himself a settler, but in a sign of the changing times, he now sits in the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
This is not the case of focusing on a few bad apples to paint a bad portrait of Israelis or of Zionists. These extremists are the people in power pulling the strings. And that, along with our knowledge of Israel's current assault on Palestine, make the documentaries difficult to watch, but also very insightful. I think they are very much starting points for learning about the Israeli occupation, but given how long it's taken to get this information into the mainstream, I think that there's hope that the world is opening its eyes to the injustice, and hopefully the public tide is turning against Israel. I highly recommend the book that I referenced earlier, The 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. It's quite dense, but it's just really packed with information, but you can also find like lectures and talks from the author on YouTube if you want. Thank you for watching. I know this is a little bit of a shorter video than usual, but like I said, my main reason for making this video is to raise money for the fundraisers I talked about. So please donate if you can. Please share the video and the fundraisers, leave a like and a comment. And I appreciate you all for being here, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.